In this video, we will show you how to filter data in the backend based on filters selected by the user in the front end, so that your backend only sends relevant information to your front end. This is especially important when you're working with millions of records and you cannot afford to send all the information to the front end, to the user's browser, because it will either slow down significantly or crash completely. In my backend, I have a list of 992 tickets, which have a title, description, a status, info required, new, in progress, done, a type, sales question, product feedback, bug. In my front end, I have a page reserved for admins where they can see this list of tickets, and I want them to be able to search for an item based on a search term, a status, and maybe the type of the ticket. In order to do this, I need to configure the API call that will allow my backend to send the information to my front end based on those filters. So on my Xano API endpoint, the default endpoint that gets all the tickets, I added 3 inputs: search, status, and type. The search input is a single text because I will only be sending back a single search term. You can see it's a text because it's in between quotes. A single text for the status. Again, I will be sending back new because this is just a text. I just need one text. And then a list of types, because I want the user to be able to select multiple ticket types at the same time. So I will send back a list of text. I can see it's a list because it says 0, 1. So there are 2 items. And I can see each item is a text because it's in between quotes. So in my endpoint, I added those 3 inputs. I have an action here and a precondition just to make sure that my user is an admin, because it's a page that I want to reserve for admins. And then when I query all the tickets, I added a custom query to check that the ticket title in my database and the ticket description, again in my database, included the search term. I added the toLower function to make sure that I didn't have any problems with casing. And then I have a condition that says, so my ticket needs to include the search term and to match the status and to match the ticket type that was selected by the user. Ignore the values if empty. So if I run and debug this in Xano, if the inputs are empty, if the user did not search for anything, did not select a status or a type or types, my backend will send back all the items. So you have 10 here and 982 more. But if I choose the status new, for example, and the type sales question, then I will get the tickets with a new status and the type sales question. And if I add a bug, I will also get the tickets of the type bug as long as they have the status new. How you configure your API call will depend on what backend you're using. The one thing to be careful about is that you need your front end to communicate with your backend in a way that they understand each other. So if you have a multi-select element in your front end it implies that the user will be sending back a list of selection. Even if they only select an item, it will be inside a list, inside an array. So in your backend, you need to be able to receive an array. You need your front end to send the array, and you need your backend to receive that array. The values that your front end sends to your backend also need to be understood. For example, in our case, one of the statuses of a ticket can be info underscore required. When the front end makes the call to the backend to get those tickets, it needs to send that specific value, info underscore required. Otherwise, the backend won't understand what ticket status it needs to send back. If the front end sends something like info space required, the backend is likely to think, well, I don't have any tickets that have info space required as a status. I only have tickets that have the status new, the status done, the status info underscore required, and the status in underscore progress. So back in WeWeb, when we configure our options for the select status, we need to make sure that the value we are sending matches the value in our backend. So done, in underscore progress, info underscore required, and new. Great. Same with our multi-select. The values we are sending would be bug, product underscore feedback, sales underscore question, which matches what we have here: sales underscore question, product underscore feedback, bug. So with that in mind, we can now add the ticket collection to our WeWeb project with those 3 inputs. We'll call it admin all tickets. We can copy the URL like this, or use our base URL and say /ticket. The base URL is very helpful if at some point you need to change projects but keep the same endpoints. We will add an authorization header because our endpoint requires authentication. And we will add our 3 query strings: search, status, and type. And we can see from the documentation, the Xano documentation, for this endpoint, we need authentication, and we can send query strings. Let's try the status new. Let's just hard code it, so to speak, and see what we get. So we only get 189 items, which is a good sign. We're not getting the 992. And if we look inside these items, we see status new, status new, status new. We have 2 sales question and a bug. Let's see if we only want bugs and product feedback. Now we still have status new because we have that filter, but we have bug, product feedback, bug, and no more sales question. That's great, but remember, we want our users to be able to filter that information. So let's bind the search input to our search bar variable and the status to our status variable and the type to our type variable. Let's click continue. I get 1 object, that matches my search, Melersis new, which is what I had here, Melersis new product feedback sales question. Now, if I get rid of these options, we see here that the current selection is empty. And here I've changed it to all. I can remove my search bar, but nothing happens. This is because I need to bind to the correct collection. So here I'm bound to an old user collection data. I can bind to my admin's tickets. And on my filters, I will add workflows on change to fetch, rather refetch my collection. So refetch tickets. I can copy this workflow and paste it here. It will be exactly the same. And on my search bar, I actually already have a workflow on change because it is best practice with a search to use a little delay, a little debounce, so that you don't make the call instantly when someone types in a character. You give a little bit of delay. So we'll do this. We will bind the search bar value here because we want to update a variable called search with delay. And only then do we want to, after we've done this, we want to fetch our collection of tickets reserved to admins. And here on our search bar, you see we have a little delay. So this is very specific to search. It's to improve the user experience. We have a dedicated video on how to build this search bar yourself or how to use the built-in search bar, which comes with a delay. So if you want to learn more about how the delay works, I recommend you watch that video. The only thing now is that on my collection, instead of binding to the search bar variable, I will bind to the search with delay. So with that 500 millisecond delay, which will make it for a nicer user experience. I need to click continue to save my change. Let's say now I search for new items of product feedback type. There we go. Now, if I select the all category, I will get an empty list. Why? Because in my database, there's no status all. I created that in my variable so that my users would have an easy way to revert back to all the icons. So in my collection, I will say if the status is all, the status value is all, then I actually don't want to, I want to send an empty string. I don't want any filters. Otherwise, I want to get the status value. Let's try again. There we go. One last thing we could do right here, instead of 5 tickets, we could say, here we have the information of the total. So we could say, if the total is more than 1, then I want the value to be whatever number of items plus tickets plural. Otherwise, I want a formula, a switch formula, and then if the total is 0, then the value will be no ticket found, or no tickets found maybe. And if the value is 1, I will say 1. There we go. Let's remove code. Now we have 228 tickets. And finally, again, one little last thing. We see that because we're making an API call, it takes a little bit of time. So let's add a loader below our header and above our collection list. Let's center it. We will say that we want to display it when the collection is fetching. And our collection list will be the opposite. We want to display it when the collection has been fetched. Back to preview mode. Very nice. That's it. That's how you can add backend filters so that when users interact with the front end, the API call that is made to the backend will ensure that only relevant information is sent to the user's browser. How you set up those filters in the backend will depend on the backend you're working with. On the WeWeb side of things, what's important to remember is that the API call you make to your backend will need to include values that you want to match in your backend. Make sure those values are correct and your backend can understand what your frontend is asking for.